Hello everyone, I'm Ravi again. Again, it's not part of my name. My name is Ravi. This time I want to talk about ASP.NET Core uh, command line interfaces, or in short, it's called CLI. CLI is a very handy tool if you want to work off of the command prompt or a terminal, or if you like more commands instead of a visual GUI. That's an excellent tool for you. But there are other alternatives as well, right? For example, most of ASP.NET developers use Visual Studio as the primary tool to build web applications. So if you continue to use that tool, Visual Studio also has a lot of integrated functionality to work with a lot of the features that command line tools offer. For example, the first thing that comes into my mind is creating a project. So you can use CLI, .NET CLI, to create a project, to attach it to a solution, to add files like global JSON and stuff like that, just out of the command line, right? But obviously, if you like a GUI based approach, you can use Visual Studio to obviously create a project, and it gives you a nice graphical user interface with the template that you want to pick. If you want to go with the traditional MVC, or if you want to use a SPOS approach, or if you want to build Razor pages, or whatever the template you want to pick, or if you just want to start with an empty template. Uh, so it gives you all those options for you to check out. But obviously, when you write code, when you write a .NET CLI command, you gotta rely on the help section, and you gotta pick the right options for the switches and whatnot. So that's a in a nutshell command line CLI commands versus a Visual Studio GUI. So I personally, if you ask my preference, I've always used Visual Studio to create project, to build projects, to run projects. All of that is I just relied on Visual Studio. But obviously, I will show you as a follow-up to this. You can use .NET Build, .NET Run, .NET List your SDKs. What's the latest version of the SDK you install in the project? All of those are possible using the .NET CLI as well. Next up, I want to talk about some of the packages. So what are Nuget packages? What is Nuget in the first place? Nuget.org is a online repository where you can publish your reusable packages. And you can have your own version of Nuget in your own company too. You can have a private token, only authorized people can consume those packages. And you can also create one for your own corporation. So, but from an online perspective, Nuget.org, N-U-G-E-T, Nuget.org is an online repository that hosts thousands of packages that are available for the developers to consume. Right? And what's in a package? A package is nothing but a library that is available to you in a DLL format, dynamic link library, right? So DLL is a library that you can add to your project. It's a class library somebody else wrote, and you can pull it into your project, and you could use some of the functionality that's offered by that library. In a nutshell, that's what that is. One of the popular examples from an ASP.NET Core perspective is Entity Framework Core. Entity Framework Core, or EF Core in short, is a package, or is a library that you add to the ASP.NET Core uh, web project, right? So it's an ORM tool, which is an abstraction layer on top of your database. And it supports many databases, like it supports SQL Server, it supports MySQL, SQLite, Postgres. So it has a good number of database support. But on top of these databases, you want an abstraction layer, and that's what this offers, a way to communicate or interact with your database. And that's what SQL Server, that's what the EF Core is all about. And it is a package, and you pull it from Nuget.org, right? And there's a couple of ways to do it. You can use .NET CLI to add it, or you can use Visual Studio Package Manager, right? You can right-click your project, and you can say Manage Nuget Packages, and it gives you a user interface where you can search for the package that you're looking for, and then you look for a pre-release version or a stable version, and then you can choose the projects that you want it to go that you want it to be part of. And that's usually, I'll show you a demo of this after I finish done talking about it. So that's in a nutshell what a package is and how you can install a package a couple of ways as we talked, or from the .NET CLI or from the Root Studio as well. Next up, I want to talk about global JSON. Global JSON is is a JSON file, obviously, and it specifies the SDK that you want to use in your project, right? So, for example, in a dev environment where you have developers working remotely, and one of the developers is working off of one city, another developer working across another time zone. When you have a distributed environment like that, it's easy for each developer's machine to be working off a different SDK version, right? So you go ahead to .NET website and you can download the most latest .NET SDK, and you might be working off of that in your local Visual Studio. And when it's time to check in your code to the central repository, like to the source control, like Git, um, then you're checking in your version of the SDK, and which may not work for other people who is pulling the latest code from the same source control. In cases like that, it's important for you to mention the SDK version of the project. This is similar to what Angular and React they do in package.config. In package.config on a client-side Spot project, you mention the version of the Angular that you're using. If you were, the latest one is Angular 10.0, right? So if you want to use 10.0, you say the package.config, this project is set up to work with 10.0. Same thing for a .NET Core project, you can also mention the version of the SDK. Well, this is different than the moniker. The moniker is for the application, you mentioned the .NET Core App 3.0, .NET Core App 2.0, so that's the moniker. That means the runtime version. So that's the runtime that you want to use when you want to run your app, right? To build your apps, you need the SDK, right? So the SDK also has its own version, so don't get confused there. So global JSON is a file that allows you to specify the SDK version. Next up is git ignore. This is also another file that you can add to your source control. So I think most people already know this, but I just want to mention it, that git ignore is a file that allows you to exclude files from committing to source control. If you make certain files part of the .git ignore, then those files are just on your local machine and they will never be committed to the source control. Right? So that's the benefit of that. And you will have files like, for example, if you have a settings file where you apply your own local connection strings, or you want to do something specific to your local machine, then you want to use the git ignore for that. Next up is I want to talk about www.root. www.root is a folder that ships along with your default template. It doesn't matter which template you use. You can use the basic empty template, which is a basic empty web template, or an MVC template. So www.root is a folder where you put all your static content in it. It could be CSS files, images, it could be third-party libraries. It doesn't matter what it is, but that's the placeholder to put your static content. For example, let's say that you have a HTML page that you have a certain path, and you want to host an HTML page as part of your application, and it's a static HTML page. That means there's nothing dynamic in it. It doesn't change per user. It doesn't rely on any input parameters. It's always constant output. For such a page, you can put it inside of www.root folder. So that's the advantage there. So when you do that, though, you have to make sure you enable the middleware called static files, right? I'll show you that as well in the demo. So that's the benefit of putting it. That's how you host static files. Next up, like I said, adding packages and removing packages, all of that is possible using the .NET CLI as well. And a couple of things I want to mention here about the ASP.NET Core server. So ASP.NET Core ships with a server called Kestrel server, right? So, I mean, you can switch it out to use HTTP sys if you want, but Kestrel is a default one, and that is a application-specific server. But that is not equivalent to IIS. IIS acts as a reverse proxy, right? That is in front of your Kestrel. So when the HTTP request comes in, it first comes to the IIS, which is the reverse proxy. So incoming request could be HTTPS, and IIS can terminate the HTTPS at that point and just send the raw HTTP request to the Kestrel server. And the Kestrel server can pick that request up, and it creates the HTTP context, right? So HTTP context has the HTTP request and the HTTP response, and the context is passed over to the application middleware, right? So to the application pipeline. The pipeline consists of many middlewares, right? MVC, for example, is one of the middlewares, right? And although they changed the name starting ASP.NET Core 3.0, it used to be called just the MVC middleware, but I think now it's they have a couple of names. There's endpoint routing, and there's a routing. They kind of changed the name, but I think the idea is the same. The MVC is one of the middlewares in the pipeline, and usually the last one, right? So the Kestrel server receives the HTTP context from, creates the HTTP context and passes down to the pipeline, right? And each of the middlewares that is registered to the pipeline has the opportunity to inspect what's in the request. If they want to modify it, if you want to short circuit the pipeline, if they want to add something else to the request and pass it to the subsequent pipeline, they can do all sorts of things in each of those middleware. And static pages is one of the middleware, right? So if the incoming request is to a static HTML, the static files middleware can handle it, and it can short circuit right there and send the request back to the client using the same path, back to the Kestrel, and the Kestrel to the reverse proxy, and back to the client machine. So that's kind of how the HTTP request processing works in ASP.NET Core. Right. So next up, I want to talk about, I'll show you this in the demo as well. I want to talk about .NET tool packages, right? So for example, certain packages like EF Core, they have tool commands, right? So if you want the EF commands, EF Core CLI commands to be cross-platform, they expose tool packages. So .NET, you can install the tool packages by using the syntax like .NET space tool space install the package, right? So usually when you specify the suffix, when you specify the option global when you're installing a tool package, it means that you're installing the package outside the scope of the project. So if your machine has 5 different ASP.NET Core projects, and if the tool package is installed globally, that means it can work across all the 5 projects. It's not locked up to a single project, and that's what the global option means. So I'll show you that as well. So what do you gain out of installing a tool package? At that point, once you have a tool package, you can use .NET CLI commands. So if you're working on Windows, or you're working on Mac or a Linux operating system, it doesn't matter the operating, it's cross-platform. So the tool package will work across any platform since you install it, the tool package. Right. For example, once you get into EF Core, like if you want to add a migration, if you want to remove a migration or roll back a migration, if you want to update the database from a migration. So support for database schema changes using migrations, you typically do that from .NET CLI, right? So and that brings up another important point. Not every single option is available using Visual Studio. You may create a migration manually, but the way you create them, at least the way I have always created EF Core migrations, is using .NET CLI, and I've updated the databases using .NET CLI as well, using the update database command. So Visual Studio will cover the most popular commands, but it's sometimes you have to rely on the .NET CLI command line toolkit. Because that has the full list of operations that you can perform from the tooling perspective. What about client-side packages? If you want to install client-side packages, there's also a repository that Visual Studio can work with. It's called CDN.js. So you can go to CDN.js and you can pull packages like bootstrap CSS or any other client-side package. It's kind of like NPM, right? On a client-side SPA, usually use NPM um, to or Yarn, for example. You use these type of tools to pull the client-side JavaScript packages, right? So Visual Studio has integration with this CDN.js to. I'll also show you how to pull a package like Bootstrap from CDN.js to add to your www.root folder as well. Okay, so that's kind of what I got from an explanation standpoint. I'm just going to quickly show you what I just talked about using Visual Studio and also .NET CLI.